Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering the Dandelion Dynasty series, Book 3, The Veiled Throne, chapters 36 and 37. In these chapters, I am validated. I knew that Toof and Radia couldn't be like this. I knew it. And also, I was wrong. We do get the beginning of the restaurant wars. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Kyle for commissioning this episode. Kyle has succeeded in commissioning the remainder of this book and is now getting started on commissioning Speaking Bones. So anybody who is listening who wants to help Kyle out with that, I'm sure he would appreciate it if you're able to pick up an episode or two here and there. And I am really excited because these chapters have... You guys know, I was saying like how rough it was 2 episodes ago. It was bad news, bad news, bad news. Then last episode, we got a really nice reprieve with some low stakes stuff, seemingly low stakes. I'm thinking it's actually higher than it seemed. And I was like, all right, well, that was nice while it lasted, but probably next episode, we're going to have to jump back into atrocities again. But not exactly. We get the whole thing with Toof and Radia redeeming themselves. And then we get restaurant wars after all, and I am delighted. So, let's talk about Toof and Radia first. Chapter 36, Two Thanes. Kiri Valley in the foothills of the World's Edge Mountains. The 12th month in the 8th year after the departure of Princess Thera from Dara for Ukyugonde. 17 months until the Liuku must launch their new invasion fleet to Dara. So we're in Volyu's POV here, and he is thinking to himself, he's on the back of this Garanoffin that is like choice. It would be an award winner if it were in a Garanoffin show. And he is on this thing feeling like I should be a lot happier, but I'm not riding it properly. I'm inside a cage. And there are folks around me guarding me, ready to kill me the moment that I do something shady. He sighed quietly, keeping his face placid. With his eyes closed, he tried to imagine things working out better than they had. On the way to Aluro's Basin with the caravan of winter tribute for the Pikyu, Volyu seethed and muttered to himself. So this dude is basically what we find out, because like you all know, I did not trust this motherfucker for a second. The whole time I was just like, I understand wanting to give him a chance. I really get that temptation. But this man has shown who he is so many times. And he has shown who he is in such a way. There are people who do shady things, but you can see the corners that they cut because they did feel a sense of guilt and maybe were in a way trying to make up for their wrongs in other areas, even though nobody else was really able to see that's what they were doing. They were assuaging their own conscience. But the way that we find out everything Volyu had been up to, it never really felt like he was genuinely remorseful about any of it, or that he felt he had done anything actually wrong. It was just like, well, if everybody had just seen how great I was to begin with, I wouldn't have had to do this, which is low-key an attitude that we come across quite a lot in these books, and also I think in the world. And right here, we get the whole thing again. If only Takval and Thera had agreed to share their glory with him, allowed him to play the hero for once in his life. But no, they had to hog all the honor and glory for themselves and assign him the most dangerous task of all, to act as a spy And even if he accomplished what they asked, what then? He would be given the title of Peki-Votan, a meaningless gesture, since all the Aegon would view Takval and Thera as their saviors, while he would be despised, laughed at, and mocked as no better than a Tanto Leonaro, because he had not led them to victory. No, Volyu was too smart for that. He had to find a way to make things work out better for himself, as he always had. And this is just what it comes down to. And this is what I mean when I say the stuff that he had done in the past, he's not sorry for. All he ever wants is to make sure he comes out on top. And there's no sense of him ever really considering other people in a real way. And I don't think that's something that you can change about a person. I think you can keep an eye on them and make them, but I don't think if they have shown no interest in the well-being of other people that you can suddenly get them to give a shit, you know? And I know that what Thera was trying to do was keep an eye on him to a degree where this would be possible. But the fact that he was in the position to deal with the other tribes and like be the one to convey information back and forth meant that they were entirely reliant on his version of everything, which made me really uncomfortable from the beginning. So yeah, he's over here like, well, I'm going to let all of these people and their children be slaughtered so that I don't get laughed at, which I don't think him being laughed at was even really on the table. I really think that was in his head. You know, he was just creating like an worst case scenario situation for himself, like to justify this incredibly selfish thing that he's doing. And if the worst case scenario that he could come up with is people will laugh at me, bruh, really? That's you're willing to let people die so that you aren't a little embarrassed. Really? What are you and I love too, there's a moment where he's thinking about how, even at one point he had given Thera a compliment and she had edged away from him. And I don't recall specifically what this is, but I am confident that he said something really creepy and weird, because this is how fucking dudes are. They say some shit and they really think that this is nice. And all we hear is like, titties, look at your titties. I can see them. They're right there. They're nice. You know, just something like fucking off. So he had gone to Peki-Kuju. I love this, the way that it's set up. He described how it all began with the perfidious Luanzia, and let's see, how he had tried his hardest to dissuade them from their fruitless endeavor, which would no doubt redound upon the Aegon with 10 times the misery. How they had threatened him and tortured him. Here he undressed to show Kuju the scars on his back and shoulders, which his wives and shamans had helped him prepare with gashed cactus juice. Which the fact that they were all helping him to prep for this like betrayal is really extra gross. I was hoping that he was just doing this shit on his own, but he had like all of these folks. And granted, I bet his wives didn't have a lot of choice. The shamans, unclear, not sure how much choice they had, but just knowing that this was like a conspiracy that involved quite a few people makes it somehow worse for me. How he had nonetheless tried to thwart them at every opportunity, denying them goods and warriors, sending them false information, extracting from them as much food and furs and sinews and bones as possible to delay their preparations. And Kuju was like, so why are you telling me now? And Peki-Kuju, Volyu is like, I was trying to find their darkest secret. He explained he sensed Thera and Takval were hiding something from him. And then again, oh, how he had suffered their tortures in silence, how he had listened with boiling rage as they insulted the brave and honorable Liuku, how he had matched wits and cunning with that slippery woman, how he had fought against his own guileless and open instincts to gain her trust. Everything about it's so well written. I just could not stop laughing. At one point, Kuju just chucks the bowl of Kyofir at him and is like, will you get to the fucking point? And he says, she is intent on seizing the city ships at Tatin. I believe she wishes to murder you and your thanes in cold blood in your moment of sanctified celebration, as you honor the gods with fragrant sacrifices. And then, to escape divine anger at the sacrilege, she will board the city ships during the ensuing chaos, as the Liuku and Aegon fight over the mastery of the scrublands. There is going to be an opening in the Wall of Storms, I'm sure of it. That is why Thera is so insistent on being in Totten at the final moment. Which, he's not wrong. He's not wrong. Which, I really hate the fact that he, figured this out. So, we come back to the present, and he's looking around and just thinking about how, everything had technically gone to plan, so why doesn't he feel like he's more in control? And it's because you aren't. You handed the reins over to a guy who appreciates that you gave him this information, but you did so in such a way that proves you are untrustworthy, even though you think you're really fooling him somehow. Volyu is not good at appearing like the good guy. And it's because he's not. And he really thinks he's smarter than everyone around him. And let's see. And then he had very carefully hinted at the reward Kuju had promised him. He didn't dare hope for any of the metal weapons or valuable barbarian treasure, but he was hoping Kuju would give him Dara slaves, perhaps even Thera herself. Gross! Ugh. Ugh. I hate this so much. And some of Takval's more docile warriors, which would vastly enhance his reputation among his own people. He had already worked out the story he would tell at home, of the most base betrayal by Thera, of lack of foresight by Takval, of a most brutal and unanticipated assault by the Liuku, of his own heroic intervention with Kuju that saved the lives of the surrendered Aegon warriors. In response to his query, Kuju had shackled him inside this cage and informed him he would be brought back to Selyusaki under armed guard. You'll be handed over to the elders of your settlement. I'm sure they'll deal with you fairly once I tell them you're responsible for the deaths of thousands of Aegon. But I'm your loyal sheepdog. There will be plenty of other sheepdogs to take your place. But you know what I can't stand? A cur who thinks he can use me for his own purposes. No, please, please listen to me. I can help. But Kuju had already turned and walked away, having lost all interest in him. And this was really fascinating because let me go into Kuju's POV. And I was tempted, against my better judgment, as much as I know what Kuju is like and how fucking tricksy and bloodthirsty and ruthless he is, I couldn't help but appreciate this moment and how he sees right through Volyu and sends Volyu basically with a fucking target on his back to his own people. I cannot wait to find out what really happens with him. But then we go to Kuju's POV, and he is actually pretty intelligent, but he has this sort of contrary nature that winds up getting used against him here. Let's see. Oh, right. So this I thought was really funny. The resistance in the valley had been fierce. Though surprised and overwhelmed, the Aegon and their Dara allies had put up quite a fight. In the end, most of the remaining fighters had been forced to retreat into a single Dara-style building. The leaders had asked for Kuju to come to the door to negotiate. Suspecting a trick, Kuju ordered one of the Kulaks to dress up in his own Garinafin skull helmet and sent the decoy. As soon as the fake Kuju and his escorts approached the entrance of the building, it had blown up in a fierce explosion. And I was just like, God damn, that is pretty rough. Warriors within 100 paces of the building all ended up with horrible injuries. And this is when Kuju is like, I won. So why am I unsatisfied? And I was like, because you didn't actually cow them. I feel like that's really the thing. Also, he didn't get any significant people. And I'm trying to find the spot here where, okay. somebody comes to him with the information about Toof and Radia coming back to their Liuku, and he is really unsure what to make of them initially. And I think for the most part has pretty good judgment on how to determine whether they're trustworthy or not. So the new captives kneeling below the hill had been delivered by a pair of defectors. The two, Toof and Radia, were Liuku Naros who had been forced to serve the Aegon, but managed to seize their Garinafin from the escapees. And he is hoping Theron and Tokfal are going to be there, but they are not. It's just a bunch of children. And he doesn't know 2 of the children are Theron and Tokfal's kids. And the kids almost give themselves away, but Toof and Radia are really careful to cover their speech by yelling at certain points so that they don't. And Toof, bless him, he is so nervous about what they're attempting to do here that he is sweating profusely and coming across as deeply nervous in a way that actually kind of works in his favor, because Kuju interprets it as him being unsure how he's going to be welcomed by the Liuku after it's basically Toof, what Kuju sees is a person who had to go along to get along with the Aegon and is now worried that he's going to be called a coward for it. Now, what we know is really going on is a whole other thing, but his nervousness is sort of working in his favor here. Meanwhile, Radia is the one that's managing the narrative the best and also predicting what Kuju is going to do, and thus knows exactly what to say to get him to do what it is they want. And in summary, Kuju is testing them by asking what we should do with these children. And when the 2 of them are pretty quick to say you should just kill them, he immediately thinks the kids know something that these 2 don't want me to find out. And so I'm not going to kill them. I'm going to keep them alive because there's clearly some piece of information that might be valuable, and I will suss it out eventually. So I won't do what they say. They're too insistent on taking this particular course of action, and I don't trust it. We find out later that that's fully what Radia expected, that he is always a child that does the opposite of what he's told. And she knew that by just saying you should do this one thing, that he wouldn't. And we know, once we hear her talking about it with Toof, even though she was right and it worked, she knew as she did it, it was a huge risk. It was very, very possible that she was about to make a gamble that was not going to pay off. And both of them just kind of keep thanking the gods that things worked out as well as it did, because for the most part, this all goes to plan. And I just want to mention how I was doing reading this, because it wasn't until I fully thought Toof and Radia had done a betrayal. Definitely believed they were really turning their backs, because why wouldn't I? And then when we got over to this section and Toof says the things they did to us, I was all right, I know they didn't do things to you. And I know these 2 characters well enough to at least feel making up that they were mistreated isn't the way they would handle this if they were genuinely defecting back. It just, the immediate response I had to the way they were playing it was, this is fishy. Something's not right here. And especially when the kids are we treated you really well. And Toof says, Aegon and barbarian children learn to lie from birth. And, Kuju had already basically said, there was no shame in what you did working with them as you needed to. Even my own father pretended to go along with the Dara dogs, basically, until he could, enact his plan. there's no shame in that. So the fact that Toof is like still trying to lie and say that they were mistreated when it's been made very clear it's not being held against them, I was like, they're trying to do something here. So let's see. The shaman, you and your brother need to know when to shut up. Your father and I have told you countless times that you need to learn to know when to yield. That's right. It was the barbarian scholar. Taria and Riva, both of you need to listen to your mother and keep your mouths shut. Don't we have enough to worry about already? And it feels like these dudes are pretty certainly like feeling that Radia and Toof are doing something as well. They have a vibe here of like, wait a minute, this isn't working out the way I thought either. And keeping these kids from talking as much as possible is going to help. So finally, we have the moment where Kuju promotes both of them to Thane. I love how completely, like, again, Toof's awkwardness and like preoccupation with what could go wrong works for him. It makes it seem like he is just so overwhelmed at the gift that Kuju's giving them both that he doesn't know what to say initially. And the two of them are put in a position because like what they are thinking, again, Radia is trying to get Kuju to do the opposite. So let's see. Kuju says, ready the Garinnafins and we'll leave immediately after lunch. These are your captives, maybe your future slaves. How do you suggest we keep them safe? Maybe you can send some trusted Thanes to bring them back to Totten like the other captives, suggested Toof, after much thinking. Are you volunteering then? Asked Kuju, a smile curving up the corners of his mouth. Toof stared at the Pikyu, looking confused. But Radia, who seemed much quicker of mind to Kuju, immediately bowed her head. Thank you, O great Pikyu. But we're not Thanes, objected Toof. Radia turned to him looking incredulous. She punched him. Shut up, you idiot. Thank the Pikyu. This just cracked me up. You don't have proper clans, do you? Maybe I'll ask Tovo to adopt you later. The shamans will mark you with your rank scars tonight, and then the two of you will be in charge of escorting the prisoners to Totten. And the two of them look at him and they try and, again, shouldn't we be at the vanguard hounding down your enemies? Everyone knew that escorting prisoners when there was still more battle was a shameful task. No buts. Didn't you just claim you would do whatever I wanted? Inside, he was rather pleased at the reaction from these two. He didn't trust them, not completely, and it was better to have them out of the way. But the fact that they were so eager to serve their Botan was a good sign, and by putting them together with the prisoners, he hoped the young captives would be tempted to say something that would give away the shameful secret he was sure they were hiding. He liked secrets. He made people easier to control. So, 5 days pass. And let's see, I'm trying to find the spot here. Two Garinnafins and their passengers made their way northwest along the Blood River, one of two rivers feeding into the Sea of Tears. This was the way to the site where Pikyu Tenryou had spent his childhood among the Aegon. One more round, Votan Ru Ta'asa and Votan Sa Ta'asa, asked Toof as he raised a small skin cup. So Toof and Radia get all of the other guards super drunk. And again, this moment where they're like drinking really fast, but so much of it goes down their chin and down their chests. And I was like, yeah, wild. It's almost like they're not drinking at all. They wake the kids up and they are, I love this so much. The kid, Tonto especially, does not understand what's happening. So when they are brought out and see Toof and Radia, it doesn't process for him what it is they're doing. And he goes and kicks Toof because he's just like, fuck this guy, and isn't seeing he's helping people escape, you goon. And the whole, like, this is a very big risk Toof and Radia are taking. They just got promoted and they're about to like let all of these charges go the wrong way. You know, it's going to look really bad for them. And they have to injure each other to make it convincing that they were like overpowered. But I suspect they're going to endure more punishment. So they are really taking one for the team here. And the whole way that this went. So I am going to try and find the exact spot, because this was the only thing that I sort of felt like I wasn't understanding. And if anybody listening wants to like kind of fill me in on this later, feel free, because it was sort of the way that I interpreted this. Toof and Radia are talking after they send the kids away on the Garinafin about what it was they did. And Radia said it was the only way. They can't possibly escape Kuju with all those children slowing them down. My only regret is we didn't lighten their load even more, and we managed to delay the pursuit by half a day with the gambit. Every second counts. So they brought these kids thinking that it would keep Kuju from pursuing Thera and Takval, which I guess it did, but I didn't get the impression they were going to pursue to begin with. Like, when the two of them show up, maybe I missed the moment where Kuju was like considering sending a Garinafin after them and doesn't. But I just may have like sort of missed a couple of like little moments that would pull this all together for me. But yeah, Toof said not all of our gambles paid off. Vara. There was no time to explain. Radia put a comforting arm around his shoulders. You tried to save her. You tried. And I was like, did he? Because I thought he just like let go of her. And I don't, I hate this. I hate this for them. So yeah, the chapter ends with the two of them like beating the shit out of each other so that they can look convincing. And it just made me really happy that the two of them hadn't actually betrayed everybody, because they gave a good vibe. I really did like them. And if it turned out that they were full of shit, I was going to be truly surprised, you know? It's not to say that it is out of the question. You can misjudge people, but, you know, it's nice to be like, okay, my instincts about them were right. It's validating. So then we go to chapter 37, the first contest, part 1. I am so excited about this. So I didn't really get a chance to fully indulge in talking about how I feel about this section of the book last time, because, you know, there was so much happening that I wasn't going to have time to talk about absolutely everything, that I had to hit the major plot points. And there are still some plot points in this, obviously, to touch on, but I feel that there is so much time spent on the description of the meals and the details about the way they're presented that I can like take my time a little bit more in describing the way this goes and actually have some fun with the part about food, which is, as anybody who knows me is aware, my entire jam. It is my peanut butter and my jam and my bread. It is everything. So what was fascinating for me about the way that Ken Liu decided to handle this, at least so far, I had mentioned in the last episode that it seemed like what he was sort of pointing toward was the advantage that the Splendid Urn was going to have over the other restaurant, which is the other restaurant's name. I can't even remember what it's going to be called, actually, now that I say that. But their advantage was going to be from the way I was interpreting how things were being done, as this is like more down-to-earth cooking made with local ingredients in ways that are significant to the local people, whereas this other restaurant is going to be doing food that is so esoteric and so maybe pretentious, depending on how you decide to look at it, with ingredients that are so rare as to almost feel alien that perhaps they're going to be reaching too much for the stars and they're going to hurt themselves for it. And while I don't dislike that approach, I wasn't totally positive that I was going to buy it. And the way that this chapter goes overall is that while the splendid urn makes fantastic food, clearly, they are not going as hard for the overall experience of eating, the theater of it, as the other restaurant. So the treasure chest, that's the one. Okay. I just had to go and find this here. And despite the fact that their food is excellent, it's just not enough. So first of all, we meet Mozo Moo. And Mozo Moo had been described in the last chapter as like a descendant of a famous chef. And I had assumed Mozo Moo was going to be a male. And it turns out to be the little girl who had been in the kitchen that the Blossom Gang was like, why is there a kid in here? And it's funny because when I was reading that chapter, I sort of wondered if maybe that was going to turn out to be the chef because everyone was so cagey about it. But I didn't have a chance to really talk about it because there were so many other things to get to. And really, even though it did occur to me that might be true, I didn't really believe it. I just was kind of like, I don't know, that feels like a sort of a weird direction to take it. I don't think so. But no, it turns out that Mozo Moo is indeed like very, very young. Let's see. She climbed up the steps, took her place. The crowd craned. She's just a kid. What is she, 11, 12? And everybody is sort of calling her a prodigy. I'm really curious if she's actually as young as she looks or if she just looks like she's that young, but I'm going to assume she's actually that young. And Mozo Moo is really taking to heart the craft that her ancestor was like, I don't know if it was handed down specifically, but I'm going to assume it was. And so she goes very hard. And Mati, so first of all, Mati had been sous chef. She was not the main chef for Splendid Urn. Reminder, Splendid Urn, their chef went down when they found out they were going up against Mozo Moo. He fainted in terror, essentially. So now Mati is out here by herself, not ever having like led the charge before in this sense. And there is so much pressure on her. And Mati has a bit of, there's a sense of real clinging to the roots of how Mati learned to cook. And I really kind of enjoyed the way that this goes because I was sort of wondering if we were going to do a particular thing and it doesn't go this way. I want to read the beginning of this section. As the six of them surrounded her in the kitchen courtyard, vying to recount their adventures, all she heard was a flood of names of exotic ingredients she had never touched, cooking techniques she had never tried, classical Ano poetry that she had never studied. Stop. She held up her hands. Just stop. This is my contest, not yours. She had always found the people of Ginpen a bit too full of themselves and their school-taught knowledge. High-minded, as the poets would say. Even after a decade in Ginpen, she found the city's elite customers not entirely welcoming. In a way, the capital of Old Ha'an felt to her not unlike Tiffan's fancy new restaurant. All golden glitter on the outside and a cold, icy cellar on the inside. She was afraid that she didn't belong. But we can help, said Dandelion. These are the very sophisticated dishes they're attempting. You're going to need someone who can decipher their poetry and get at the heart of their story. Mati had no idea what Dandelion was talking about. She knew that big spending diners who hosted parties at the Splendid Urn with girls from the aviary were not just there for the food and drinks. She knew that Lodon didn't always understand the riddles and poems recited by the scholars toasting each other. She knew that the splendid restaurant she had helped to build in Gimpen was nothing like a tavern she had run back in Zudi, but what did poetry and story have to do with cooking? Defiance arose in her. No one liked to be looked down upon. Sure, she didn't know how to read logograms or recite poetry, and she wasn't sophisticated like Dandelion and Weedy, but no matter how fancy a restaurant tried to be, the foundation was food, wasn't it? And though she didn't know poetry and story, she knew food. I've kept the Splendid Urn in business with my artless hands for 3 years. I reckon I can keep the game at my level a little longer. We didn't mean it like that, said Dandelion contritely. My mind is made up. I'll handle this Mozumu myself. And what it comes down to is a mantra that she kind of repeats to herself a few times, which is stick with what you know, work hard, and ignore the noise. Now, here's what I was expecting. I was expecting for the treasure chest to get to put their food out first, and that they would do something incredibly ostentatious, and then Mati would come out with something really simple that just gets to the heart of the food as an experience, and everything that the treasure chest had just done would feel totally overblown and absurd. And that is not how it goes. Mati goes first, and her food is excellent. They all agree. It's very, she makes simple dumplings, which is kind of looked down on by one of the judges, who's an old woman who's being led around. There is the chapter starts with the introduction of a woman named Lolotika Tune, head girl of the aviary, Ginpen's most exclusive indigo house. And she is basically like not only just extraordinarily beautiful. Everybody is like, no, hottest chick in Ginpen for sure. She is also really charismatic and just excellent at drawing in a crowd and performing. And the fact that it was presented for her to be the person who sort of hosts this event is considered really a bit of a stroke of genius on Tifan Huto's part, because I'm pretty sure it was his idea. But let's see. I'm trying to find the spot here. Each side will present a full meal to the judges: an appetizer, meat and vegetable entrees, drinks, and a dessert. The only restriction is that the dishes must be cooked with the ingredients on hand and the people employed by the competitors. No running at the last minute to some other restaurant to pass off their work as your own. Second, although the judges only care about the final result, it's no fun for the rest of us if we just watch them eat. Am I right? That's why the cooking today is going to be done in the open here in Temple Square. So there's a lot of people watching this whole thing go down. And we also have Lolo leading this particular judge back and forth. And the way that she responds to things is getting under Mati's skin in a way that she doesn't want to admit. When we have Mozomu show up, there's a bit of an aside between Dandelion and Kinri about, like, she's so young, there's no way that she's going to be able to, like, pull this off. But Dandelion is watching her and is like, the way she's handling her assistants makes me think that she's actually pretty smart. She's having them each work on parts of the dish that go together, but she puts the dish together herself so that none of them actually knows the entire recipe. And just all of this is proving that, like, she is actually pretty clever and guarded about the way she works, you know? So let's see. A dove landed on the giant sky. I forgot the fucking gods are here. And Rufizo is the one who asked them all to come. And they're like, what are you doing? There's a fucking war happening and you want us to come and watch a restaurant war thing. And he's like, no, trust me. I think this is going to be important. Just like fucking humor me. Okay. So Lolo and Seka walked around the big stage, looking first at one of the side stages and then the other. Lady Kofi, can you tell us what's happening in the treasure chest kitchen? I have to say I'm a little confused. The knife work is exceptional, of course, but I'm not sure I know what dish Mozo is preparing. Those ebony quails are quite rare and prized for their medicinal bones and tender flesh. And it turns out that this girl is harvesting their testicles, which, all right, why not? Oh, this makes me even more excited, gushed Gina. Over in that corner, you can see one of the sous chefs picking out the roe from the deep-sea jade crabs. And beyond the island, they're slicing the seed pods from Dyron's tail seaweed fronds. As you know, you have to look through 1,000 fronds before finding even one pod. The sheer expense that is going into this dish is breathtaking. So at this point, Lolo is like, all right, we're gassing these guys up quite a bit. Maybe we should move on to the other group. And Lolo is having a hard time gassing up the Splendid Urn because they're just making dumplings with like very ordinary ingredients. And it's low-key boring. She's doing her best. Lolo doesn't want either group to win. She doesn't take sides. She wants to be able to make them as exciting as the treasure chest, but it's not easy. So they're making pot stickers. Her voice faded and then stopped. Could you say a few more words to give our audience a better sense of these delicious treats? Well, I don't know if they're delicious. As far as I can tell, they're just standard pot stickers. Pork fillings, some pipe scallions for flavoring, 100-fold dough. I didn't even realize the pot stickers were on the menu at the urn. Honestly, I'm not sure that kind of peasant fare. Hey, I think they're doing something new over at the treasure chest again, said Lolo, and she and Seka gently ushered the commentator back to the other side. Mati's face was bright red. She had heard every word. So, Mati is really struggling here because apparently what they initially were going to do was do her like signature dishes. She sends people out for ingredients, and it turns out all of these markets have been completely bought out by Hutto on purpose so that she couldn't get her hands on the things that she was used to using, which is part of why he went to the Splendid Urn to begin with, was to see what ingredients were used the most in their dishes specifically so that he could make sure she couldn't find them, which is diabolical. And it says, no matter how much she prayed, the ingredients she needed could not be found. Kinri came to her again, explaining that he and his friends had some ideas for how to help her. She tried to keep an open mind this time and listened to them, but they were not cooks, and the suggestions they gave were preposterous, involving the use of complicated machines and strange devices, the sort of ideas outsiders who knew nothing about cooking would come up with. No, panicking and putting one's hopes in well-meaning but unskilled friends was not the answer. And what I think is really interesting here is, on the one hand, if somebody who does not know anything about what the fuck you're doing is trying to give you suggestions, it can be deeply fucking annoying. Like, I sympathize. On the other hand, there is some truth to a person who is an outsider in a particular field coming in, not being blinkered by the expectations and traditions of that field, and thus sometimes having more original ideas because they aren't steeped in the culture surrounding the field. So a part of me was like, probably what he suggested is bonkers, but also maybe there is still a way to take some of what he suggested, if not all of it, and use that in a way to make the theater work for you, you know? I'm really curious what he suggested, and I suspect we're going to find out pretty soon. But all I could think about was things like sous vides, you know, like the kinds of machines that a lot of people who do regular home cooking look at with a sort of like, come on, man, just poach a fucking egg. You don't need to do all that. And it's like, well, no, you don't have to do all that. A poached egg is delightful, but sous vide is a little bit different and does accomplish something slightly different. And you can tell it's not a completely negligible difference. And trying to act like it's negligible is a little dishonest, you know? So she is continuing to like ignore all of this. She serves her food, and though they all really like it, it doesn't quite feel like enough already. And then the treasure chest comes out. Your voice lingers like a scab I can't stop picking. Your laughter an itch in my heart that I can't scratch. Cruel Lady Rapa to have made you so beautiful. Heartless Lady Kana to deny me armor against you. Don't speak, my darling, my sweet, my every moment wakeful weakness. Words lie, but not the music of your limbs sweeping over me, moonlit ocean waves. I'm sorry. What? That is so beautiful. It like grosses me out. That is genuinely moving. Like, this is not the kind of poetry that feels so flowery as to be absurd. This is gorgeous. And it really, them coming out of the gate with this poem made me go, oh, fuck. Like, we're about to really see something here. So the assistants come out. Mozo comes out. I present a dish from my great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather Sudami, one that hasn't been seen in public since the time of the old Zana kings. Music of the limbs. And Dandelion is bickering with Kinri because he wants her to solidly be on Team Splendid Urn. And I don't blame him for that. But Dandelion knows really fine dining, and so she is impressed with this in a way that he isn't, because he doesn't get it. So let's see. She wrote several cycles of poems to a mysterious woman she loved at the Zana court, who we only know by the name of Jito of White Sleeves. Although only fragments have survived, she pushed Nakipo's practice of constructing intricate, elaborate visual puns with onologograms to new heights. And she says, in fine cuisine, the key is to invoke all five senses, but the best dishes must draw upon a sixth sense, often described as mind pleasure. This means that the dish should engage the intellect as well as the body by drawing upon literary and artistic allusions to complement the experience of the other senses. And later on, she explains to Kinri about how one time her father was going to be serving this really expensive aged beer. And because her brother wanted to know what it tastes like, she emptied the jar and filled it with regular beer. And all of the men who drank the regular beer went on about how amazing it was. And what I really liked, because so many people use stories like that as evidence that people assign worth to things in an arbitrary and oftentimes like kind of elitist way, and that it's not actually true that things that are worth more are better, because people can't actually tell the difference. And like, that's not entirely untrue. There are times, I think, where that can happen. But Dandelion defends the men who said how good it was by saying, no. They genuinely experienced that ordinary beer differently because of their expectation and the story they had told themselves surrounding what it was. They weren't lying and saying, oh, it's so good, even though it was like to them very ordinary. They experienced something other than what that beer is on its own. And that is the thing for me. that I love about this chapter that Ken Liu definitely gets. Food, I am about to get teared up, guys, because this is how much I care about this shit, which means I really need to write a cookbook because it's a whole thing, but food connects us to each other, to our past, to the land that we live on, to rituals that mean something to us. It's everything. Like, that's part of why I feel so passionately about it. It is genuinely so deeply important. And it's part of why people get so like intense about food being unfamiliar or somebody not respecting the way things are made. Like, if anybody watched the absolute disaster that was Mexican Week on Great British Bake Off, you understand them making that food the way they did without the understanding of any of it was an insult. And really just, it is something that I cannot understand how a show that popular hasn't got people to step in and be like, do not do that. What are you doing? But food is it is something that all human beings need to partake in. We all have to eat. And yet, the ways in which we all, depending on culture, depending on household, down to the microcosms of households, we all do it so differently. And the way we do it tells something about where we come from and what's valued in our households. And like, it's so revealing. And I thought what we were going to have was the ostentatious absurdity of this like high-minded restaurant versus the purity and wholesomeness of ordinary cooking, which is honestly a very tired trope. And I don't know why I expected Ken Liu to do this, because he has never demonstrated anything but an understanding of the importance of these kinds of things. I should have known better. But instead, what we get is this presentation that feels like a person who gets it, genuinely orchestrated every single aspect with incredibly focused attention in a way that was meaningful. It wasn't just, I'm going to make this like look a certain way because that's trendy right now. I'm not going to make it with this certain ingredient just because that thing is so expensive, although that certainly plays a part, but because that ingredient is linked to this thing that is meaningful in our history. And that's what that's what the story is. That's the part, the sixth sense being engaged. And so when I was reading, I was like, oh, they are so fucked, because this whole thing, there's this projector. Let's see. As Mozo's assistant served the judges, an extra plate was brought over to a small white pedestal called a specimen stage. Several mirrors were angled to bathe the dish in strong sunlight, such as mirrors were used to spotlight actors in a theater, and instantly a gigantic image of the dish appeared on the white screen hanging behind the judges. The crowd hushed. 8 edible sculptures sat around the edge of the plate, each an abstract representation of one of the gods of Dara. The bulk of the plate, on the other hand, was taken up by a delicate mosaic of glutinous rice and seaweed that invoked the orderly grid of farms, ponds, forests, and fields of Dara as seen from the air. As the crowd gazed at the screen, Seka and Lolo huddled with Mozo to get some of the chef's notes. Music of the Limbs celebrates a love made immortal through Suzare's poem. Music is the theme, and the immortal gods are the players. This is an appetizer where the rice and seaweed at the center are to be enjoyed to the accompaniment of a divine orchestra composed of 8 sections. As you can see, there are 8 seasoning stations arranged around the plate, representing the 8 musical instrument families and their respective patron gods. First, at the north point, we have the Silk family of stringed instruments playing homage to Tazu, who rules over the briny waves as well as waves along vibrating strings. She pointed to an ethereal confection of spun sugar, When you bite into it, the strings vibrate against your palate and tongue, creating an internal music of sweet delight. Northeast corner, bamboo instruments pay homage to Kiji, Lord of Air, connoisseur of breathing pipes. The tubes you see are hollowed bamboo shoots pickled in cider vinegar, arranged in the shape of the famed Ningen falcon flutes, which were invented by Namoji and carried aloft on kites to be played by the divine winds. And she says, these bamboo shoots are from Mount Kiji itself. Sudamu himself praised the bamboo shoots from Kiji for possessing an airiness not found anywhere else, which they aren't supposed to have access to these ingredients. And Huto is looking really smug about it, but I'm like, you may have just kind of overplayed your hand here. I don't know. The wood instruments represent by glowing homunculus mushroom limbs. The stone instruments represented by ebony quail testicles hollowed to resemble an echo bow and filled with a dab of sea cucumber roe. Clay instruments represented by ocarina-shaped pellets of edible clay from the foothills of Mount Rapa. Let's see. The gourd and vine instruments represented by those rare pods from deer and tail seaweed and coconut shavings. The audience and judges gazed at Mozomu with awe. No one thought of her as a mere child any longer. And this just, again, food is art. It just is. And there is nothing to say that making something out of more expensive ingredients or with more intricate steps makes the food inherently better. But what she has done here is infuse a meal with an intricate story that's also part of their religious beliefs, and in a way that feels genuine and like considered. This is art. And it could very easily, the thing that happens sometimes, people confuse art with it looks beautiful. That's not all art is. And so there are plenty of people out there who make food that looks beautiful. And when you taste it, you're like, I guess. That happens a lot with pastries, especially because people sort of get like, sugar does things to people and they will just like things that are simply sweet. It's a lot easier to impress people with desserts, I think. But so much of the time, things that like look very fussy are only done so that they appeal visually. And then when you get down to the flavors, they're not really there. But she has clearly paid attention to that aspect as well, based on the way that all of the judges are responding to it. Little Pimi is the first one to to eat the like sugar. And it's just like, oh my God, the homunculus is seasoned to perfection. I've never had such tasty bamboo shoots. The pickle sauce brings out the flavor of the mountains. The clay is to die for. You haven't tried the fried boar rinds yet. This texture is simply exquisite. Like caressing the ancient books of the Ano sages with your tongue. And this is what I'm saying. They're talking about they can taste the mountains, that this is like reading. Like, it's because she put that in their heads and arranged things in this way. They would never be fucking referencing any of this. But she managed to create a whole narrative to uplift this meal that clearly already had a ton of attention put into it to begin with. She wasn't using the story as a substitute for the food. She was using the story as a vessel to carry the food to them. Does that make sense? I'm just so into this. Like, you can tell. And again, Kinri is just so frustrated because Dandelion is very impressed and he wants her to not be. And finally she has to get him to like admit that, okay, it is kind of impressive. And he says something about how like, she brings up weighing the fish is not the same as tasting the fish. Weighing requires a fair scale, but there's no fairness when it comes to taste. And that's exactly it. It's in your head. And this is why it's really hard to tell like who to listen to and when somebody tells you that place has really good food, how do you know whether to trust what they say? Because I have had people who know nothing about food tell me a place has really good food, and I go, and it is not. It is not only not good, it is bad. And as I've gotten older, I've begun to really learn who to listen to and who not. But it's so subjective. And a lot of it, it's just like about what you're used to, about what the food you grew up with, and how much the food you're eating here tastes like what you grew up with and what you're used to. Things that you expect versus what you get, you know? And it's 11 votes for the treasure chest and 1 vote for the splendid urn. And it's the little kid who voted for Mati. And there is something about the fact that the little kid voted for Mati that I think, again, a lot of people would be like, well, see, kids don't get like confused and won over by the theatrics that are so meaningless. He really just looked at the food on its surface and judged the food. And that's all well and good, but that's not how adults eat. So acting like a kid who looks at things in a more simplistic way is simply purer because they're young and they don't get their enjoyment isn't clouded by all of these additional extraneous factors is kind of dishonest. Like, you can't pretend those things don't have an effect on you as an adult. So taking one judgment as being somehow more honest and worthy than the others because that's a child and so they're more connected with like what matters, it's fake. It's not, it's just too simplistic. So I kind of enjoy that the kid goes for this thing that's like very similar to what his mother makes, because that's his story and that's what he knows because he is a child still. That's the story. When you're little, everything is simpler because your world experience is very, very limited. So he is judging off of what he knows. And it's not that his understanding and enjoyment is invalid. It's just drawing from a much shallower well. And the other adults are going to have connections with the gods, with the regions of Dara, and the understanding of the symbolism that this little kid just won't appreciate. He doesn't understand that. Why would he? So, of course, that doesn't make any impression on him the way it does for people who have lived in the world. So Mati leaves the stage, and a lot of people feel sorry for her, thinking that she's just embarrassed. But she goes into the wagon with Kinri and Dandelion, and she goes up to them, and it says, to their surprise, Mati didn't look dejected at all. Instead, she appeared to have had a great weight lifted off her shoulders. To keep going on the way I had planned would mean total loss. Let's try it your way. Are you sure? Asked Kinri, unwilling to injure the pride of the sous chef. Mati nodded determinedly. There's a time to stick to what you know best, and a time to throw away everything and begin anew. I can't beat them the only way I know, so I'm going to learn some new tricks. And this made me really happy, because there are so many people who really do treat any sort of elevation, and I use that word with the understanding that it implies something is better than the other, but you know what I mean. Adding a lot of like different elements, complexity. That's what I mean by elevation. There are a lot of folks who act like that is putting on airs and not actually meaningful to the end result of a dish. And that, I made smoked brisket and mac and cheese, good home cooking. And it's just as good as some fucking plated tiny entree from Le Cirque. And it's like, it's delicious in its way, but it is never going to have that theater and complexity of flavor that something made with unusual ingredients, it's just not going to be the same. So there is something to learn, even if you are good at really basic food, that doesn't mean you shouldn't open yourself up to trying things that are more advanced and unfamiliar. There is a lot to be learned in that. And sometimes you're going to be like, yeah, I understand truffle oil. Great. Give me my fucking Kraft Mac. And that is fucking valid. Like having eaten a giant bowl of Kraft Mac for dinner 2 days ago. Amen. But I'm really glad that I learned how to work with truffle oil, because there are times where that shit just knocks something right up into the stratosphere as far as flavor. It's not like you could just add truffle oil to whatever and it's suddenly better. It's not like that. But when you understand the intricacies of certain flavors, that is going to be helpful to just understanding the concept of flavors working together overall, and gives a new dimension to your interpretation of the way things go together, and adds another layer over the simplicity of like the smoke, sweet tanginess of like a smoked barbecued item. Yeah, well, what if you added like some kind of relish to it, something that's really sour and like pickled, of a sharpness, adding another thing that is the brisket amazing without it? Sure. But if you do this, it's just somehow more interesting. It's just something extra, you know? And it's not always necessary, but it's not inherently meaningless or just pretentious and trying too hard. And I just really appreciate that this chapter was not simply dismissive of more elegant, focused cooking. It's trying to like really get to the heart of what food means and how easy it is to dismiss this sort of theater as being over the top, when we all kind of experience this sort of theater, but it's just different depending on the lives we live. Like when your grandmother, who makes a stuffed pork loin for your birthday every year, opens the oven and pulls out the same old roasting pan she's used for the last 15 years, and the smell hits you and you're suddenly 9 years old again, that is theater too. It's just different, you know? It's still playing on something emotional in you. It's not just about the pork loin. You could go somewhere else and have something technically made better, but it won't do to you what that meal does to you. And there's a reason. It's drawing on something about your connection to the world, you know? I love it. I love it. I love this section. I can't wait for the next chapter of Restaurant Wars. I'm just super excited about it. Honestly, it's just like annoying how much I love food sometimes, because I read this stuff and I'm just like, God, I am such a fucking mark. It never fails. I could talk about this all day. I really should just start like a food podcast. I don't even know what that would look like, but anyway, all right, I'm going to wrap. Thank you, Kyle, so much for commissioning this. Appreciate you a lot. Thank you to everybody for listening. Hope you're enjoying. And until next time, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.